Dr. Juan Park rubbed her tired eyes as the lab's overhead lights hummed in the late evening quiet. The building had emptied hours ago, but she remained fixed at her station, unable to tear herself away from what appeared on her screen. 3 years of meticulous work, gathering DNA samples from thousands of individuals across continents, ages, and backgrounds, had finally revealed something that defied conventional understanding. It wasn't a subtle shift. It wasn't a statistical anomaly. It was a pattern so clear that once spotted, it couldn't be unseen. "This can't be right," she muttered, running the analysis again. The results remained unchanged. The telomere sequences, those protective caps at the end of chromosomes that typically shortened with age, were showing signs of regeneration in recent samples. More troubling, the regeneration patterns followed a clear timeline of acceleration over the past 5 decades. Jiwan reached for her phone and called Taiyo. Despite the late hour, he answered on the second ring. "You need to come back to the lab," she said without greeting. "I found something." 40 minutes later, Dr. Taho Kim stood beside her, his normally composed face showing rare signs of disbelief. His glasses reflected the blue glow of the monitor as he leaned forward, scrutinizing the data. "Look at this," Juan said, gesturing to the highlighted segments on the screen. "The telomere regeneration is unprecedented." Taho adjusted his glasses. "Impossible. These markers suggest neural pathway expansion beyond normal parameters." "Not impossible, just unexpected." Juwan pulled up a timeline of samples dating back 50 years. "See for yourself. It's happening across geographic and demographic boundaries. Humans are evolving, Tayo. And not gradually. We're accelerating." "Have you checked for contamination? Equipment errors?" Taho asked, though his voice lacked conviction. 7 times. I've run controls against archived samples. I've verified equipment calibration." Juwan stood and stretched her back. "Whatever this is, it's real." Taho sat down heavily, his mind racing through implications. "If you're right, we're looking at the most significant evolutionary event in human history. And it's happening right now, under our noses." Juwan pulled up another set of brain scans. "Look at these neural density comparisons from 1970 to today. The increase in synaptic connections shouldn't be possible in such a short time frame." "Who else knows about this?" Taho asked quietly. "Just us, for now." Juwan hesitated. "I thought about bringing it to Director Sunwoo, but you wanted confirmation first," Taho finished for her. "Yes, and honestly, I'm not sure how the Institute would handle this information." Juwan glanced around the empty lab. "This goes beyond academic interest, Tayo. If humans are evolving this rapidly, it raises questions about what we're becoming." Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows. The 2 scientists worked through the night, pulling additional samples, running new comparisons, and documenting their findings in a private server. By dawn, they had confirmed that the changes were present in roughly 18% of new samples, a number that had doubled in just the past decade. "Get some sleep," Taiho finally said as morning light filtered through the blinds. "We'll continue tomorrow with fresh eyes." Juwan nodded, too exhausted to argue. She gathered her things and headed home to her small apartment 15 minutes from the research center. After a quick shower, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, her laptop open to review the findings once more before sleep. Her mind couldn't let go of the implications. If human DNA was changing this dramatically, what would it mean for future generations? What physical or mental changes might follow? The soft ping of an email notification interrupted her thoughts. Juwan glanced at the screen, expecting a message from Taho or perhaps an automated lab report. Instead, she found an unmarked message with no sender information. The subject line was empty. The timestamp showed it had arrived just seconds ago. With hesitation, she clicked it open. The message contained only one line. "You've noticed the changes. We should talk." Juwan felt her heart rate quicken. The message was too specific, too timely to be spam. Someone knew what she had discovered. Someone had been watching. Her finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won out. She clicked reply and typed a single question. Who are you? The response came almost instantly. Someone who has been waiting for humans like you to notice. Your discovery isn't the beginning, Dr. Park. It's the culmination of work that began centuries ago. Juwan stared at the screen, a chill running through her body, despite the warm tea in her hands. The sender knew her name. They claimed knowledge of a process spanning centuries. Another message appeared. Your lab's security cameras have a blind spot near the east entrance. Meet me there tomorrow at 9 p.m. if you want to understand what's happening to your species. Juwan closed her laptop with shaking hands. She should call Tahoe. She should report this to security. Instead, she found herself wondering if this stranger might hold answers to questions science couldn't yet explain. Sleep eluded her as the rain continued to fall outside her window, and the mystery of humanity's sudden evolutionary leap grew deeper by the hour. Juwan checked her watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. The cafe she had chosen was a small place tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, far from her lab and any colleagues who might spot her. Despite telling herself this meeting was foolish, possibly dangerous, she had come anyway. After a sleepless night and a day spent looking over her shoulder, curiosity had won out over caution. She had told only Tahoe where she was going, extracting a promise that he would call the police if she didn't check in by 10. The cafe was nearly empty when Juwan arrived. Just an elderly couple sharing a dessert and a tall man sitting alone by the window. He looked ordinary enough. Short black hair, plain clothes, nothing remarkable except perhaps his height and perfect posture. Yet something about him seemed slightly off, as if he had studied how to appear human rather than simply being one. When their eyes met, he stood. Dr. Park, he said with a slight nod. I'm Do-Hyun. Thank you for coming. His voice was pleasant, his Korean flawless, yet with an accent she couldn't quite place. Juwan approached cautiously and sat across from him. You know about my research, she said, keeping her voice low. How? Do-Hyun smiled. The expression seemed practiced, like someone who had learned to smile from watching others. Because we've been waiting for it. He reached into his pocket and placed a small metallic disc on the table. It was smaller than a coin and thinner than a credit card. Before Juwan could ask what it was, the disc hummed faintly and projected a holographic display above the table, a 3-dimensional model of a DNA strand that rotated slowly in the air. Juwan glanced around in alarm, but a subtle shimmer in the air told her that somehow their table was now hidden from other customers' view. Don't worry, Do-Hyun said. No one can see this. The DNA strand transformed, highlighting specific sequences that Juwan recognized from her research. But the model showed details her equipment couldn't possibly have detected. This is impossible, she whispered. We don't have technology that can. That's correct. You don't. Do-Hyun interrupted gently. I represent what you might call observers. We've been monitoring human development for centuries. Juwan stared at him, the implications of his words sinking in. You're not human. Not in the way you understand it, Do-Hyun replied, the hologram shifting to show what appeared to be a timeline of genetic markers. But what's happening to your species? It's remarkable. The genetic sequence you discovered is the beginning of something extraordinary. Juwan's scientific mind raced ahead of her fear. These changes, did you cause them? No, Do-Hyun said, seeming almost amused by the question. We don't interfere at that level. This is natural evolution, but at an unprecedented pace. Your environment, your technology, your social structures, they've created selection pressures unlike anything in your species' history. The hologram shifted again, showing brain scans that matched those from Juwan's lab, but with greater detail. New neural pathways forming, enhanced cellular regeneration, improved immune response, Do-Hyun continued. And most significantly, changes in how human consciousness interfaces with your physical form. Juwan leaned forward, scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. Meaning what exactly? Meaning that some humans, like yourself, are developing abilities that would have once been considered impossible. Enhanced pattern recognition is just the beginning. The coffee in Juwon's cup had grown cold, forgotten. How do you know I'm experiencing changes? Do-hyun tilted his head slightly. You noticed patterns in genetic data that your equipment wasn't designed to detect. You saw connections across populations that shouldn't have been visible. These aren't just the results of good science, Dr. Park. Your brain is processing information differently than it did even a year ago. Juwon thought back to recent months, how research problems that once took weeks now seemed obvious, how she could follow multiple data streams simultaneously without confusion, how even people's behaviors had become more predictable to her. There are others like me, she asked. Many, Do-hyun confirmed. Most don't recognize what's happening to them. They attribute their new insights to hard work or luck. But the changes are accelerating. Juwon's scientific skepticism finally reasserted itself. Why should I believe any of this? You show up with impossible technology, make claims about human evolution, and expect me to just accept it. Do-hyun deactivated the hologram and pocketed the disc. I don't expect you to believe me without evidence. That's why I'm offering to show you more. He slid a small card across the table. This address. Tomorrow night. Bring Dr. Kim if you wish. His brain scans show similar developments. You've been monitoring Tahoe too. Juwon felt a surge of protective anger. We monitor patterns, Dr. Park, not individuals. But when someone stands out from those patterns, he shrugged. They become of interest. The shimmer around their table faded as Do-hyun stood. One more thing. The genetic markers you've identified. They're just the surface. The real changes are happening at quantum levels your instruments can't detect. That's theoretically impossible, Juwon objected. So it was faster than light travel. Until it wasn't. Do-hyun replied with that same practiced smile. Tomorrow night, I can show you what's really happening to humanity. Whether you come is your choice. He walked out, leaving Juwon staring at the address card. Part of her wanted to dismiss everything as an elaborate hoax. But the DNA model had shown sequences she had only discovered yesterday and told no one about except Tahoe. Whatever Do-hyun was, whatever he represented, he knew things no ordinary human could know. And despite all her scientific caution, Juwon knew she would go to that address tomorrow night. The elevator descended far deeper than Juwon had expected. Beside her, Tahoe shifted nervously, his eyes fixed on the floor counter as it passed -30 and kept going. Do-hyun stood perfectly still, seemingly unbothered by the rapid descent. How much farther? Juwon asked, breaking the silence. We're almost there, Do-hyun replied, his voice calm. This facility was built 300 years ago, when your country was still primarily agricultural. The elevator finally stopped at -58. The doors opened to reveal a corridor that looked nothing like the abandoned warehouse they had entered above ground. The walls gleamed with a pearlescent material that seemed to emit its own soft light. Please follow me, Do-hyun said, leading them down the corridor. For the past 3 weeks, Juwon and Tahoe had met with Do-hyun in various locations, each meeting revealing more about the changes happening to humanity. But this was the first time they had been invited to what Do-hyun called a proper facility. They passed through a curved archway into a circular room that took Juwon's breath away. The ceiling and walls displayed what appeared to be real-time images of space, stars, planets, and phenomena she couldn't name, all moving slowly as if they were standing inside a massive observatory with no physical barriers between them and the cosmos. Welcome to the Seoul Observation Hub, Do-hyun said, gesturing around the room. One of 12 such facilities on your planet. Tahoe reached out to touch a passing star, his hand passing through the projection. This technology, it's beyond anything we have. Because it isn't yours, Do-hyun replied simply. He made a gesture with his hand, and the room transformed. Now they appeared to be standing in the center of a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with thousands of points highlighted in different colors. 17,000 civilizations, Doyan explained as he showed Juan images of worlds she could barely comprehend. Each evolved through similar patterns. With another gesture, he zoomed in on various planets. Juan saw creatures that defied imagination. Some resembling Earth life, others completely alien. Some appeared to be made of light or gas, while others had physical forms that seemed to shift and change as they moved. All these species, they're real? Tahoe asked, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Very real, Doyan confirmed, and all part of what we call the Coalition of Evolved Worlds, a community that has existed for over 80,000 of your years. Juan watched as the images shifted to show what appeared to be the history of various species, their development from primitive forms to advanced civilizations. But humans are different, Doyan continued, the display focusing now on Earth. Your adaptability, your creativity, your potential exceeds anything we've documented. The images shifted to show human history, but with strange highlights around certain periods. The Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, the Digital Age, each marked with data points that suggested accelerated evolutionary changes. You're saying we're evolving faster than these other species? Juan asked. Not just faster, differently. Doyan enlarged an image of human DNA, highlighting the sequences Juan had discovered, but adding layers of information she had never seen. Most species develop enhanced physical capabilities or specialized cognitive functions. Humans are developing both, simultaneously, along with something we've never observed before. What's that? Tahoe asked. A form of collective consciousness that doesn't sacrifice individuality, Doyan replied. It's theoretically impossible, yet it's happening. Juan studied the star charts, trying to grasp the scale of what she was being shown. A thought occurred to her that cut through her amazement. Why tell me this now? She asked, turning to face Doyan directly. You've been watching us for centuries. Why reveal yourselves just as these changes are accelerating? Doyan's expression became more serious. Because some members of the coalition fear what humanity might become. They're arguing for intervention. Intervention, Juan repeated, feeling a chill despite the comfortable temperature. Prevention, Doyan clarified. They want to stop your evolution before it fully manifests. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the technology around them. Tahoe stepped closer to Juan, a protective gesture that wasn't lost on Doyan. Are you here to help with this prevention? Tahoe asked, his voice tense. No, Doyan said firmly. I represent a faction that believes humanity deserves the chance to realize its potential. We've been guiding your species subtly for millennia, preventing extinction events, nudging scientific discovery when you were ready for it. The display shifted again, showing historical moments where disasters had been narrowly averted. Pandemics that mysteriously burned out, nuclear accidents that somehow didn't escalate, asteroid near misses that defied probability. You've been protecting us, Juan said, understanding dawning. Some of us have, Doyan corrected. Others have been studying you like specimens, waiting to see if you destroy yourselves before reaching the threshold. And now, Juan asked. Now the waiting is over. The changes you've discovered are happening too rapidly to hide. Soon, thousands and then millions of humans will manifest abilities that will transform your society. Doyan's expression was grim. The prevention faction sees this as too dangerous to allow. What exactly do they plan to do? Tahoe asked. Their first approach will be subtle, a targeted virus designed to suppress the genetic expressions you've identified. Doyan brought up models showing the potential spread of such a virus. If that fails, they have more direct methods. Juan felt her heart racing. The implications were staggering, not just the existence of alien civilizations, but the idea that humanity was on the verge of an evolutionary leap that some of those civilizations wanted to prevent. Why are you telling us? She asked. What can two scientists possibly do against an advanced alien coalition? Do-Hyun smiled, and for the first time, the expression seemed genuine rather than practiced. Because, Dr. Park, you and Dr. Kim aren't just two scientists. You're among the first of what humanity is becoming, and I believe you have the right to fight for your species' future. The display around them shifted one final time, showing Earth surrounded by a network of faint lines connecting various points on the planet, points that Ji-won realized represented others like them, humans on the cusp of something new. The question now, Do-Hyun said quietly, is whether you're ready to meet them. Hyunju Lee chewed on her pencil, barely listening as Mr. Kang droned on about polynomial equations. Math had always come easily to her, but lately, numbers seemed to speak to her in a way she couldn't explain. They danced across her vision when she closed her eyes, forming patterns that solved themselves. While pretending to take notes, she doodled in the margins of her notebook. The Riemann hypothesis had fascinated her since she'd read about it online last week, a famous unsolved problem about the distribution of prime numbers that had stumped mathematicians for over 150 years. As her pencil moved across the paper, equations flowed from her mind without conscious effort. It felt less like solving a problem and more like transcribing something she already knew. When the bell rang, she blinked in surprise, looking down at what she'd written. Hyunju, are you coming to lunch? Her friend Mina asked, standing over her desk. Just a minute, Hyunju mumbled, still staring at her notebook. Something about what she'd written felt important, though she couldn't fully grasp why. Instead of going to lunch, she took her notebook to Mr. Kang. I was thinking about that math problem you mentioned last week, the Riemann one. I think I might have solved it. She held out her notebook with uncharacteristic shyness. Mr. Kang smiled indulgently. The Riemann hypothesis isn't something a high school student solves while doodling, Hyunju. But let's see what you've come up with. His smile faded as he flipped through her work. He sat down heavily at his desk, reaching for his phone. By evening, 3 university professors had arrived at Hyunju's home, poring over her notebooks while her bewildered parents served tea. Before dinner, one professor confirmed what seemed impossible. 15-year-old Hyunju Lee had apparently solved one of mathematics' greatest unsolved problems. When reporters asked how she did it, Hyunju could only shrug. The numbers just made sense to me. That same week, a fisherman named Dong-Yun in Busan became a local celebrity when he accurately predicted a sudden shift in tide patterns that saved several boats from disaster. I just knew, he told stunned Coast Guard officials. I could feel the way the currents were changing. It was like reading a book. In Seoul, a middle school teacher named Mayang startled her literature class by reciting entire novels from memory, including books she'd read only once decades earlier. It's like all the words were just waiting in my mind, she explained to amazed colleagues. Suddenly, I can access every page I've ever read. In the underground facility that had become their unofficial headquarters, Ji-won and Taeho worked tirelessly, cataloging these emerging cases. Do-Hyun had provided them with technology to identify the genetic markers they were looking for, allowing them to confirm which reports represented true evolutionary advances versus coincidences or hoaxes. 17 new cases confirmed today, Taeho said, rubbing his tired eyes. It's happening faster than we anticipated. He gestured to the global map on their display, where dots of light represented confirmed cases of accelerated human evolution. What had been a sparse scattering a month ago now showed over 300 points of light across every continent. The youngest subject is 6 years old, a boy in Daejeon who can process visual information so quickly that he perceives the world in slow motion. Taeho continued. The oldest is 73, a grandmother in Jeju who developed the ability to sense emotional states with such accuracy that she can tell when someone is lying. Ji-won nodded, studying the pattern of emergence. She didn't mention how she'd started seeing patterns in everything herself. Weather systems, traffic flows, human behavior, all suddenly predictable to her evolving mind. Yesterday, She had left her apartment early because she somehow knew her usual bus would be delayed. This morning, she had called Tahoe moments before he was about to call her, already knowing what he wanted to discuss. These weren't lucky guesses. They were the result of her brain processing thousands of subtle cues and calculating probabilities with impossible speed. "Have you noticed changes in yourself?" Tahoe asked suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. Jiwan hesitated, then nodded. "It started with research patterns, seeing connections in data. But now, it's everything. I look at clouds and know exactly when it will rain. I watch people and can predict what they'll say before they speak." Tahoe's face showed relief. "I thought I was going crazy. I can remember everything now, not just facts, but experiences. I can recall conversations from years ago word for word." Before Jiwan could respond, their secure communication system chimed. Doyen's face appeared on screen. "The prevention faction is moving faster than expected," he said without preamble. "They've detected the acceleration in emergence patterns. Their virus is nearly ready." "How long do we have?" Jiwan asked. "Days, not weeks," Doyen replied. "But there's another problem. Some of the newly awakened aren't handling the transition well. A teenager in Daegu set fire to his school when he couldn't control his heightened emotional responses. A doctor in Incheon went into seclusion after becoming overwhelmed by suddenly perceiving her patient's pain physically. We need to find them before they expose themselves or get hurt," Tahoe said. "Or before they're found by those who would use them," Doyen added grimly. "Not everyone who knows about the evolutionary leap has benevolent intentions. There are human factions who would weaponize these abilities if they could." Jiwan closed her eyes, letting the patterns flow through her mind. Connections formed, probabilities calculated, outcomes predicted. "I think I can find them," she said, opening her eyes. "The awakened leave traces, digital footprints, unusual behaviors, sudden changes in routine. If we compile the right data sets, you can see the pattern." Tahoe finished for her. "Yes," Jiwan said. "And more importantly, I think I can predict who will awaken next." Doyen looked at her with new interest. "That would be unprecedented. Even the coalition hasn't developed reliable prediction models for evolutionary emergence." "Humans are different, remember," Jiwan said with a small smile. "You told us that yourself." As if to emphasize her point, the map behind them chimed, adding 3 new points of light, 3 more humans whose minds had just taken the first steps into whatever humanity was becoming. The first cases appeared in Sydney, then Tokyo, then Seoul, people collapsing in public spaces, clutching their heads in agony. Within hours, the mysterious affliction had spread across time zones, following the sun westward as the planet turned. In New York, office workers fell to their knees in busy intersections. In London, shoppers dropped their bags and crumpled to the floor. In Cairo, students writing exams suddenly screamed and clutched their temples. Emergency services worldwide were overwhelmed within 6 hours. Hospital waiting rooms filled with people experiencing identical symptoms: blinding headaches, nosebleeds, and disorientation. Medical professionals had no explanation and no effective treatment. Pain medications barely touched the agony. Jiwan watched the global news feeds with grim certainty. She had been expecting this, though not quite so soon or on such a massive scale. 8 million cases reported globally, Tahoe said, updating the statistics on their monitor. And those are just the ones who made it to medical facilities. Their underground lab had become a command center of sorts over the past month. 20 of the most advanced evolutionary cases had joined them, each bringing unique abilities that strengthened their collective effort. Hyunju, the mathematical prodigy, worked with a former banker who could process economic data at superhuman speeds. Together they managed their limited resources. Mayung, the teacher with perfect recall, coordinated with others like her to maintain and share all information they gathered. "The pattern matches our predictions," said Sunki, a former meteorologist who now could visualize global atmospheric patterns in his mind. The effect appears stronger in areas with higher concentrations of evolved individuals. Juwon's tablet chimed with an incoming message. Do-hyun rarely used this emergency channel. "I'm coming in," was all it said. 15 minutes later, the secure elevator opened and Do-hyun emerged. He looked different somehow, less composed, less human in his movements. "It's them," Do-hyun said, rushing into Juwon's lab. "The opposition faction. They've released a neurological suppressant designed to halt the evolutionary process." "We knew they would," Juwon replied calmly. "The question was always when, not if." "But this approach," Do-hyun shook his head. "It targets the specific brain patterns that indicate evolutionary advancement. Those experiencing the worst symptoms are those furthest along in the process. Which explains why some people seem unaffected," Taho noted. "They haven't begun evolving yet." Mayum looked up from her station. "What about those of us already through the transition?" "I have no symptoms. Your neural pathways have stabilized," Do-hyun explained. "The suppressant can't revert completed changes, only prevent new development." Juwon walked to a wall panel and pressed her palm against it. The panel slid open, revealing a refrigerated compartment filled with vials of amber liquid. "We've prepared a countermeasure," she said. "It won't stop what's happening, but it will protect those in transition." Do-hyun stared at the vials. "How did you develop this without coalition technology?" "We didn't," Juwon said simply. "We had help." She nodded toward a quiet figure in the corner, an elderly man who had been sitting silently through the meeting. "This is Dr. Minjin Kang," Juwon said. "He's been working with extraterrestrial biochemistry since 1983, though he didn't know that's what it was at the time." Dr. Kang stood slowly. "I was recruited to study materials recovered from an unidentified craft. For decades, I thought I was working on advanced terrestrial technology. 6 weeks ago, Dr. Park contacted me and explained what my research actually involved." "You've had access to coalition technology all this time?" Do-hyun asked, surprised. "Not your coalition," Dr. Kang replied. "There are other observers of humanity besides your faction, young man." The implications hung in the air. Do-hyun looked genuinely shocked for the first time since Juwon had met him. "The formula is simple enough to manufacture quickly," Juwon continued. "We've already distributed production instructions to trusted facilities in 12 countries. On the main screen, news reports showed growing panic. Government officials appeared on camera offering reassurances without explanations. Military units were deployed in major cities to maintain order. Conspiracy theories spread faster than the headaches. "We need to distribute the countermeasure immediately," Taho said, "starting with those showing the most severe symptoms." "Already happening," Hyunju replied, not looking up from her data screens. "Our network of evolved individuals began distribution an hour ago. Medical personnel who are part of our network are administering it as an experimental treatment authorized for emergency use." Juwon pulled up a global map showing small points of light spreading outward from major population centers, each representing a dose of their countermeasure being administered. "What about those not in hospitals?" Do-hyun asked. "Public distribution points are being established using our secure communication network," Mayum explained. "We're prioritizing areas with the highest concentration of transitioning individuals." As they watched, early reports began coming in. The countermeasure was working, not just stopping the pain, but accelerating the very process the suppressant was designed to halt. "This makes no sense," Do-hyun said, studying the incoming data. "Your countermeasure shouldn't be able to amplify the evolutionary process." "It wasn't designed to," Dr. Kang said with a small smile. "But the suppressant itself contains compounds that, when neutralized by our formula, create a catalyst effect. The opposition faction's weapon has become our greatest tool." Juwon nodded. "As governments worldwide struggle to explain the crisis, our network deploy our solution, turning the attack into an unexpected catalyst." On screens around the lab, news footage showed recovering patients displaying subtle signs of accelerated abilities. increased coordination, heightened sensory awareness, remarkable calm amid chaos. They'll notice soon, Taiho warned. The opposition faction will realize their mistake. By then it will be too late, Juan said. The process has reached critical mass. Humanity has begun its transition in earnest. She turned to Dohyun, whose expression remained unreadable. You should inform your coalition that their intervention has failed, and perhaps suggest they prepare for diplomatic relations instead of prevention strategies. For the first time since she'd met him, Dohyun laughed, a surprisingly genuine sound. I believe, Dr. Park, that humanity is going to surprise the galaxy in ways none of us anticipated. Outside, as the sun set on a day that had changed human history forever, millions of minds began awakening to possibilities they had never imagined. Minji stood on the rooftop of what had once been a simple office building in Seoul. Now it served as one of many coordination centers for humanity's transition. The evening air was cool against her skin, but she barely noticed physical sensations anymore, not when her mind was filled with so much more. She closed her eyes and let her consciousness expand outward. First, she felt the minds in the building below her, each a unique pattern of thoughts and emotions. Then further, to the surrounding streets, where thousands more minds pulsed with new awareness. Their thoughts flowed through her mind like gentle streams, not as invasive noise, but as a harmonious chorus she could tune into or filter out at will. 3 months after what the world now called the event, nearly 40% of humanity had developed enhanced abilities to some degree. Not everyone had the same gifts. Some, like Minji, had developed telepathic awareness. Others found themselves with perfect recall, accelerated learning, or the ability to manipulate energy in ways that defied previous understanding of physics. The world had changed with breathtaking speed. Initial panic gave way to wonder as people discovered their new abilities. Governments that tried to control or suppress the evolution found themselves outthought and outmaneuvered by their own evolving citizens. Institutions were being rebuilt from the ground up, designed by minds that could now see problems and solutions with unprecedented clarity. Minji sensed Juan approaching before the door to the roof opened. The familiar pattern of Juan's thoughts had become as recognizable to her as a voice or face. You're nervous, Minji said without turning around. That's unusual for you. Juan came to stand beside her at the railing. In the past 3 months, the geneticist had changed, not just in her enhanced cognitive abilities, but in her bearing. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had helped guide humanity through its most profound transformation. The coalition representatives have arrived, Juan said. They're ready to meet with our delegation. Minji nodded. As one of the first to fully manifest the new cognitive abilities, she'd been chosen to help lead humanity's response to the galactic community. Her unique talent for bridging minds made her the ideal translator between different forms of consciousness. How many factions came? She asked. 7, Juan replied. Including 2 we haven't encountered before. Dohyun says that's unprecedented. Usually new species are introduced to the coalition gradually. Minji smiled slightly. We're not following the usual pattern. We never have, Juan agreed. Below them, Seoul glittered with lights that seemed brighter somehow, as if reflecting the enhanced awareness of its inhabitants. Traffic moved with perfect efficiency. Drivers now intuitively coordinated their movements without need for signals. Power grids had stabilized as engineers developed new abilities to visualize and optimize energy flows. Even the air seemed cleaner, as new environmental solutions emerged from minds that could now grasp complex ecosystems in their entirety. Not everything had been smooth. There had been those who abused their new abilities, trying to manipulate or control others. But they quickly discovered that in a world of enhanced awareness, such actions became immediately transparent. Social sanctions proved more effective than laws when deception became nearly impossible. More challenging were those whose minds couldn't adapt to the changes. About 5% of the population had experienced psychological breaks when their consciousness expanded too rapidly. Special communities had formed to help these individuals, guided by those who had developed extraordinary levels of empathy and healing abilities. The prevention faction is among them, you know, Juan said, breaking into Minji's thoughts. The ones who tried to stop our evolution. I know, Minji replied. I can sense their caution and their fear. Are you angry with them? Minji considered this. No, their fear was rational, from their perspective. They've never encountered a species that evolved the way we have. We represent an unknown, and unknowns are threats until proven otherwise. Juan finished. A very human way of thinking, Minji observed with irony. Perhaps we have more in common with the galaxy than we realized. Juan checked her watch, a curiously old-fashioned gesture for someone who could likely sense the passage of time with perfect accuracy. We should go down. The others are gathering. Minji took one last look at the city, at the world being reborn through collective understanding. When she'd first developed her abilities, the constant input of other minds had been overwhelming. Now it felt like coming home to a conversation among old friends. Are we ready for this? She asked, not just of Juan, but of herself. We've been ready for generations, Juan replied. We just didn't know it. As they turned to go, Minji felt a ripple of excitement pass through the collective consciousness around them. Word was spreading about the visitors, about the meeting that would introduce humanity to the wider galactic community not as newcomers or subjects, but as equals with unique gifts to offer. In the conference room, 30 floors below, representatives from across Earth waited, scientists, leaders, artists, and philosophers who had embraced the evolution most completely. Among them stood Tayo, now specializing in translating human concepts for non-human minds. Kanju, whose mathematical insights had already solved problems the Coalition had struggled with for millennia. Dr. Kang, whose work bridging biological and technological systems had opened new possibilities for communication across species barriers. And Do-Yun, no longer pretending to be human, his true form finally revealed, a being of crystalline structure who had championed humanity's cause across the stars. As they entered the elevator, Minji reached out with her mind, touching the consciousnesses waiting below. Some were familiar human patterns, bright with anticipation. Others were utterly alien, thought structures so different from human cognition that they would have been incomprehensible 3 months ago. Now Minji could not only sense these alien minds, but create bridges of understanding between them and human thought. It was for this reason she had been chosen as humanity's primary representative. They're curious about us, she told Juan as the elevator descended, especially about how we maintain individual identity while sharing collective awareness. That's still our greatest innovation, Juan agreed. Not just what we've become, but how we've managed to evolve without losing what makes us human. The elevator doors opened onto humanity's future, a future that extended far beyond Earth to countless worlds circling distant stars. A future they were finally ready to embrace. The meeting chamber had been constructed in just 3 days, a marvel of human and alien engineering buried deep beneath the mountains outside Seoul. Its walls shifted subtly, adapting to maintain comfortable conditions for all delegates despite their vastly different biological needs. Minji stood slightly behind Sunwoo, carefully monitoring the emotional currents in the room. As Earth's foremost empath, her role was crucial, to sense deception or hostility from the alien representatives and to project humanity's genuine intentions. Beside her, Juan and Tayo represented the scientific understanding of human evolution, while the other 9 delegates had been selected to showcase the diversity of human abilities. The meeting chamber fell silent as Sunwoo stepped forward. Behind him stood Earth's delegation, 12 humans representing the first wave of evolved consciousness. Across the circular table sat representatives from 7 ancient civilizations, their forms as varied as their evolutionary paths. One delegate appeared as a crystalline structure that refracted light in hypnotic patterns. Another resembled an earth octopus, but with 14 limbs and skin that shifted colors as it communicated. The third was a collective of small insect-like creatures that moved with perfect coordination. The fourth existed primarily as a field of energy contained in a specialized suit. The fifth looked almost human except for its silver skin and eyes with horizontal pupils. The sixth was a gelatinous pyramid that pulsed with internal light. And the seventh, apparently the eldest, appeared as a humanoid figure composed of constantly shifting light. Do-Yun stood at a midpoint between the human delegation and the aliens, his true form now revealed, a being of translucent blue crystalline structure with no recognizable face, yet somehow conveying expressions through the patterns of light within. "We come neither as supplicants nor conquerors," Sunwoo began, his voice calm and measured. "We come as equals, ready to join this community of worlds while maintaining our unique path." A murmur rippled through the assembly. The octopus-like being's skin flashed with patterns that the humans could somehow understand as skepticism. The insect collective rearranged itself into a formation that conveyed attention. "Humanity's potential remains uncharted," Sunwoo continued, "but we pledge to explore it with wisdom and restraint, to contribute rather than dominate, to learn as well as teach." As he finished, the eldest delegate, the being of shifting light, moved forward to speak for the coalition. "Then let us begin." Its voice was not a sound but a sensation in the minds of all present, translated perfectly into concepts each could understand. "For 80,000 years, our coalition has maintained balance among evolved species. Never have we witnessed an evolution as rapid as humanity's. This concerns us." "We understand your concern," Sunwoo replied. "But consider that our rapid evolution comes with unique advantages. We retain our individuality while developing collective awareness. We adapt without losing our essential nature." The silver-skinned humanoid spoke next, its voice melodic, but with undertones that vibrated painfully, until Minji subtly adjusted the emotional field to accommodate it. "Your species achieved in 3 months what took mine 3,000 years. You bypassed crucial developmental stages, where wisdom tempers ability. This is dangerous." Hyunju, the mathematical prodigy, stepped forward. Though only 16, she had become one of humanity's most important voices. Without speaking, she projected a series of equations into the shared mental space of the chamber. Equations that describe the probabilistic nature of human evolution compared to the more linear paths of other species. The crystalline being vibrated in what seemed to be appreciation. The young one makes an interesting point. Their non-linear development may appear chaotic, but follows deeper patterns we have not considered. The gelatinous pyramid pulsed rapidly, its communication translated as, "Theory is meaningless. We must address practical concerns. How will humans prevent individuals from abusing their abilities? What safeguards exist?" Jiwan answered this challenge. "Our evolving nature itself provides the safeguard. As our abilities grow, so does our interconnectedness. Deception becomes nearly impossible in a network of minds that can sense intention and share understanding." To demonstrate, she opened her consciousness fully to the coalition representatives, allowing them to experience the new human awareness. Millions of minds connected not in a hive structure that erased individuality, but in a harmonious network that preserved and celebrated difference while creating something greater than its parts. Several delegates recoiled from the unexpected intimacy of this demonstration, but the beam of light expanded, seeming to absorb and analyze the experience. "Fascinating," it communicated. "You have developed a form of collective consciousness we believe theoretically impossible." The octopus-like being flashed patterns of deep blue and gold. "This does not address the central concern. Your species still harbors violent tendencies, territorial impulses, and resource competition. These traits combined with your new abilities could destabilize regions beyond your world." "We do not claim to be perfect," Sunwoo acknowledged. "We carry our evolutionary history with us. But consider this. The same competitive drive that you fear has fueled our most significant advancements." He gestured to Mayang, who projected memories of human history, not just wars and conquest, but art, music, scientific discovery, acts of sacrifice, and compassion. Our capacity for both creation and destruction gives us unique perspective. Sunwoo continued. We understand the precipice on which developing species stand because we have stood there ourselves. The coalition delegates conferred among themselves, their communication methods creating a symphony of light, color, and sensation that filled the chamber. Finally, the light being addressed them again. In our long history, we have witnessed thousands of species join our community. Each brings gifts, each presents challenges. Humanity's path is unprecedented, but perhaps that is exactly what our coalition now requires, a new perspective to prevent stagnation. It moved closer to Sunwoo, its light pulsing in patterns that somehow conveyed both ancient wisdom and youthful curiosity. We will not interfere with humanity's evolution. Instead, we offer partnership, knowledge exchange, cultural sharing, technological cooperation. In return, we ask only that you continue to share your unique perspective as you develop. Sunwoo turned to his fellow delegates, receiving their silent agreement through their shared awareness. Then he faced the coalition representatives. We accept your offer with gratitude and humility. Earth opens itself to the stars not as a conquered territory or a conquering force, but as a new voice in an ancient conversation. As the formal protocols of first contact concluded, Minji sensed a shift in the emotional field of the chamber, from caution and suspicion to tentative hope and curiosity. Humanity had taken its first steps into a broader existence, carrying with it both the weight of its turbulent past and the promise of its unlimited future. Outside the chamber, across Earth, millions of evolving minds felt the moment as a subtle shift in their shared awareness, the sensation of boundaries expanding beyond their world to encompass possibilities none had dared imagine before.